process in Sri Lanka back in 2002 to when it ended. And the Norwegian media reported significantly about the peace process itself. What are your feelings about the role of the media? You know, were they compassionate about the peace process and what happened? The compassion that they showed about what was happening at the time?
Well, that's a difficult question. I actually must admit I haven't done any specific research on that topic, and so I cannot give you a really qualified answer. But generally, I would say that the image, or rather self-image, of Norway as like a peacekeeper, peace nation, etc., etc., I find that a bit embarrassing, as you might understand, for me, very critical in the way they actually are playing these days, including bombing Libya. So I think generally the tendency is, we see the same in Colombia now, where Norway do play a similar role. And it's, I would say the coverage is quite nationalistic. It's more focused on Norway as a peace mediator than actually giving very much insight in the different position and actually doing a critical assessment of that role. I don't know if that was a good enough answer. This is the only I can offer.
Something, and that's it's about the whole of relativity theory. Now, media reporting across the world, it is relative to something, some forces and some powers. I mean, we cannot actually hide that fact. When it comes to British media, it is relative in international sense or international reporting to certain aspects to the government, but whereas in domestic reporting there is some kind of relativity towards people's aspirations and so on. Now, what, in your view, the international media's role, or specifically the Western media's role, or what kind of relative angle they're taking throughout, just before the war ended, during and after? So if you could actually divide these three segments during the final phase of the war, before and after, which forces or which kind of elements playing a greater role in deciding this relativity?
Again, a very complex and big question. I'll try to give an answer. Generally speaking, somebody mentioned ownership earlier today. There is, of course, an issue here. Many of the businesses who own media also are highly investments in weapon industry, these kind of issues. Of course, that will somehow create a certain frame when they cover these issues. Another issue which I have studied quite a lot is the media effects of psychological operations, media strategy by government and Pentagon, etc., which is quite sophisticated. And my experience is that the journalists mostly are not aware of this. I'll give one example. For instance, the toppling of the statue in Baghdad when the American forces invaded. That was a psychological operation done by a unit, and the attempt was, of course, to create the image of parallel to communism fall, where the masses turned down Lenin, Stalin statue, etc. This kind of thing. And the media, and actually there were very few people at the place, but how this was framed in all Western media, including Norway, was that cheering masses in Baghdad, welcoming, etc., etc., which was bullshit. This was an orchestrated, arranged event. So this helps, obviously, to frame the event at the time. During your third category, during the event, it's of course very, very complicated with access to the actual event. Then you have problems like if you're going there, you have to be embedded, and then you have sort of narrow perspective. You frame the story where you see it from the American forces. You see they shoot. You don't see where it lands and what effect it has. So the infrastructure, of course, and now in the Islamic State, with these kind of rules that I showed, come on, who are going to report critical there? So the working conditions for journalists, of course, and then the fourth phase after the war. Well, sadly enough, in general terms, journalists might be willing to be a bit self-critical. But basically they don't like to be criticized. And they rarely admit without heavy proof that they actually do mistakes. So the lack of humbleness and lack of self-criticism is, of course, then a crucial issue there. And it's also my experience that editorial newsrooms rarely summarize their own coverage. I have one exception. This was actually how I started this research during the Gulf War. I, at the time, worked as a journalist at the news desk in Norwegian news agency, and I was asked by the head of the department actually to do a summary. And I was deeply shocked how we went into the, and I at the time felt more like critical than many other of my colleagues. But these forces are so strong when you are presented frame story by people who really PR firm, media strategists. It's really very, very hard for a reporter to see through this until it's too late. Okay, this was my answer.
Time out.